go ahead and get started. So my name is Suzanne, and I'm going to be your room host today. And I'm here to assist our presenters, Kim Bellaart and Greg Hill Jr. So welcome to this breakout, and it's entitled San Diego Imperial County's Adult Education, CTE Course Mapping and Repository. So thank you again for being here. So I want to just go over a couple of housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you could please keep yourself muted, it would be very appreciated. If you do have a question, you can please enter it in the WOVA Q&A up at the top right of your screen or into the chat. I see a couple of you have already introduced yourselves in the chat. Hello, Alex Ortega. He's a job placement coordinator at Miramar. Michelle Tillman, she's a career counselor at Miramar. We have Kathy Figueroa, who's a CTE community outreach coordinator at Vista Adult School. So as you enter, keep on putting your information in the chat, and so we have a good idea of who's in the room for our presenters. Our presenters cannot see the Q&A or the chat in WOVA, so I will be stopping and kind of relaying the information to them as the presentation continues. Also, we'll be uploading the breakout presentation materials and the recording of this breakout, which will also be available for attendees to access after the conference is over. After the breakout, if you'll please click on the button Rate Session to complete a real brief survey on the session experience, that would be wonderful. And now I'm going to allow the presenters to introduce themselves and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Suzanne. And thank you all for being here for the session today. My name is Kim Bellaart. I'm the Director for Grossmont Adult Education in East County, San Diego, and I'm part of East Region Adult Education Consortium. Greg?
Thanks, Kim, and Suzanne, and all of you for taking time out of your day, and particularly most likely when you'd be eating lunch, and maybe you are eating lunch. But at any rate, yeah, my name is Greg Hill Jr. I am a research associate with WestEd. I've been supporting the San Diego Imperial County's Strong Workforce Project, particularly in the adult ed work group, for about, I guess, about a year or so, and it's been really rewarding. You know, we've done some really good work, and yeah, I'm just sort of really glad to be here to share some of the work that we've done.
All right, so we wanted to start by sharing what our goals are for the session today. So our super region in San Diego recently took on this project of doing some mapping of the career training opportunities that are available for adults in the region. And so we're here today to share a little bit of that with you, particularly from the perspective of what about this might interest counselors and folks who are working with students and helping them find their pathways and helping them find the best programs to take their next step. So our goal in this session today, our goals today, are to provide some information about the adult ed CTE course mapping process that we've been undertaking and the repository that we've created and what some of our project next steps are. We'd like to explore some opportunities to build more coherent pathways with K-12 adult ed and higher education. And also we'd like to gather some input from you all about what would provide some actionable data for use in counseling with students and supporting populations of students who may not have post-secondary plans yet. So those are some of our goals today, what we'd like to share with you, and also what we hope to hear back from you to help inform what our next steps in the process are. So before we start, we wanted to hear a little bit from you all. And so Greg is going to be sharing a Jamboard for you to answer a question. We'd like to know what you know about adult education, and even what does the term adult education mean for you? We all come at that term with a little bit of a different idea of what it means. So if you could use the sticky notes and put on what you know about adult education or what that term means to you, and add that to the Jamboard, we'll take a couple of minutes for everybody to do that.
And that
And
link
Greg,
in your chat, it's the HTTPS with the bit.ly. So it's if you go over to chat, you'll see that link there that you can access.
great, thank you. And Greg, did you want to give any instructions about using the Jamboard?
Can you see it? Can everybody see it?
Mhm.
Okay, so I was looking at Suzanne in particular, and she's very impassive, and so I was afraid. Many of you probably are sort of familiar with it, but it's really easy to use. There are a few different tools along the left-hand side here. The one of primary importance is the one that says sticky note. And so you just click on sticky note, you can choose different colors, and simply add text like this, and then click save. It automatically presents you with the opportunity to do another, to create another one. But if you don't, you just hit cancel or just click out. And you can move them around by dragging them or minimize them or spin them however you like.
Thanks, Greg. So just take a minute and put on a sticky. What do you think of when you think of adult education? What does that mean? What does it offer?
And by the way, as folks pop stuff in there, I'll kind of just try to group them depending by category, theme, or whatnot. Good. So we got
And putting
yeah.
in, I'm not sure, that's perfectly fine as well. You could also put questions you have about adult ed. I wonder if it includes, or I think it might be about, and that works too.
Yeah, in fact, do or don't we know about adult ed. I like that. Oops. I'm sure that there are English teachers out or former English teachers, so make sure that I fix that error. Also, by the way, I'm a former English teacher. That'd be really bad. Oh, lovely. So, right, we've got, oh, look at, whoever wrote this deserves a prize. Oh, lovely. 18 over, self-select. That's interesting. We've got, 18 and over. There's some recognition about credit or non-credit. That's an interesting point. Often too, those terms mean different things in different segments, right? And so I really like that in the sense that it's both a known and possibly an unknown for at least some folks on. Other students pursue curriculum, ESL, career, CTE, smaller setting. Absolutely, that's one of the benefits that adult ed brings to the educational experience. It's 18 and over, which is actually pretty unique. Colleges actually don't require that. It is a requirement of most of the funding sources, not all, but let's see. Select career education programs. Yeah, okay. Let's see here, say give them another minute. And then I don't know if folks are automatically muted, but if you're having trouble with stickies, we can take a minute and I can pop them in here if you want to share them verbally, but I'll defer to the group on how best to proceed there.
And
Yeah,
Suzanne
participants were asked to mute themselves, but they can unmute and give their input.
And Suzanne, you'll let us know if somebody puts a comment in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes, I will.
All right. So it looks like most of our comments have to do with this idea of career programs. A lot of them mention that adult education training for careers. For students over 18 for the most part, and then this issue of credit or non-credit. So it looks like that's a good starting place for people's understanding of what we mean by adult education. So we wanted to take a few minutes to look at what is adult education in California, and share just a little bit of information. So adult education has had a very long and varied history in the state of California. And with Assembly Bill 104, K-12 adult education and community college non-credit opportunities for adults were combined into consortia that were funded together. So when we are talking about adult education in this presentation, we're looking specifically at services that are geared for adults that are provided through K-12 adult education providers and community college non-credit providers that have been organized into consortia. So those two entities were put together in consortia, and 72 were formed across the state, and they're made up of K-12 adult schools, community college, and county offices of education. And there's over $500 million allocated to provide this education and training for adults in several different program areas. Primarily, these program areas are focused on providing students with adult high school diploma or equivalency, high school equivalency through GED or HiSET, English language learning and citizenship, and short-term career training and education are some of the main program areas that we serve in adult education. And over 790,000 students were served in 1920. And in the next slide, the students that are served in this adult education program are quite varied. We have 72% of the students in this adult education program are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, 59%, so over half are women. 30% of the students enroll in some type of career training program. So that is a large program area. And 34% of the students are enrolled in 2 or more program areas. So many students will be working on ESL classes at the same time they're working on career training classes, or working on high school diploma classes at the same time they're working on ESL or career training. So many students enroll in multiple programs. 10% are co-enrolled in credit courses for community college at the same time they're enrolled in adult ed, K-12, or non-credit community college courses. And 21% of ESL adult basic education and adult secondary education students transition from that program into some type of post-secondary program. So part of the idea behind creating the consortia with K-12 adult ed and community colleges was to encourage us, the providers, to make sure that we are not overlapping services and that we are meeting the needs of the students to move into the careers and to get the career training that they need to move into what they want to do. So our program is funded based on needs in each geographic area. And we look at our outcomes of what we're able to help students achieve. And so the outcomes that we are looking for in our programs are literacy gains for students, completion of an adult diploma or high school equivalency, completion of a career training certification, transition to post-secondary, and ultimately, do students get a job and or a better job with higher wages? So really, we're measuring our success based on students' ability to come into the programs and to transition out into post-secondary or into careers of their choosing. So that's what we're trying to achieve in adult education programs. So if you think about that pipeline model that you may have seen about students entering school and then progressing through their career, that's the next thing we want to look at. So these two pictures that you have here are two examples of how we look at pathway development in the state of California. The first one on the left from CLASP is a view, the core tenets of the idea of career pathways. And you can see in there how students may come in from a variety of different entry points. Oops, can we go back one? They may come into the system from a variety of different entry points and move through their education, their post-secondary education, the first job in their career path, the second job in their career path, may come in and out to get a little bit more training, all the while moving on their trajectory in their chosen career path. The second one is the picture that shows us the 4 pillars of guided pathways for the guided pathways approach. Now, looking at this as a counselor and someone who advises students, we know our goal is to help students find the career path that they want and get all of the training that they need to launch themselves into the career that they want. And if you look at these, we're trying to create a system where people can move through that system smoothly, right? They go to junior high, they get some exposure to what are the career paths that are available to them. They move on to high school. They hopefully can participate in some career training at the high school level. They can do some observation of what careers are like, some work-based learning programs, maybe even some internships. They move from there into their post-secondary careers, continue their training and their education, and then leave and apply for the perfect job of their dreams, and everything works perfectly. So just a question for the group that we wanted to throw out, and please go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. When you look at these pathways or these models that we've created to envision how students could be moving through education into their career, what are the students that you worry about, or the students that maybe don't go through this pathway in that very smooth linear process? So if you could put in the chats for us some thoughts you have from your experience of what are some of the challenges that some students face in moving through these pathways in a neat, tidy, linear fashion. Take a minute. Think about your
chat for you, but go ahead and enter in there.
What are challenges that some students you've worked with face?
Alex says the personal barriers that don't align with the pathway.
Great. Very true. Again, from your experience with students, what are other issues that students face that maybe prevent them from moving in a linear fashion through these pathways?
Michelle says cultural influence. They're not fluent in English.
Do we have any counselors from high school? I think we initially, it sounded like most people were from post-secondary. I'm wondering if there are any high school counselors in the room who know of some issues with access students may have to career paths of their choice.
Seeing anything new in the chat yet? If you have issues like typing into the chat, please feel free to unmute and provide your comments.
So far we've talked about some of the barriers that students have. And again, Suzanne, just jump in if somebody adds a question or another comment into the chat. One of the things that we've noticed is working with adult education students, not all students leave high school with a clear post-secondary plan. Not all students leave high school with their diploma. not all students who leave high school with their diploma have all of the skills that they need to be able to do what they want to do next. Some people, when we're looking at the populations that are served in adult education programs, may have stopped out for a while. They may have left their pursuit of education for a variety of reasons. And that has prevented them from being able to get a career that they want or a career that would provide them with a living wage. So one of the things that adult education looks at is where do those students fit in this picture? So we have this arrow that shows sort of a neat and tidy progress that students should be able to make. And we see in guided pathways the process that we hope will work for them, the clarity of their options, they're entering the pathway of their choosing, having support to stay on their path, and ensuring that they have the outcomes that they want. But we know that the reality for students is more like not a straight line. It's maybe even lots of squiggles. Students have lots of life that happens that may interrupt their journey on this path. So one of the things—
Sorry, I wanted to just let you know that Philip had entered that the information pathway to prospective students can be a problem. Mailing seems to be the main way that information is sent out, and that does not hit many of the students in need. And also that they work through family members to get information out to older siblings. So it's that information path that can be a problem.
Perfect segue. That's exactly one of the issues that we looked at. How do we get information to students, especially students who've stopped out for a while, about what their options are to continue on the pathway? So if it's a challenge for us as practitioners to look at this idea of career pathways and guided pathways and think, how do some of these students who may struggle, how do they fit into this? Then that's going to be a struggle for students as well. So looking at the next slide, as we look, oops, let's go one more back. As we looked at the challenge for us as adult education practitioners, we were struck with the linear pathway model not really being a fair representation of the difficulties, as many of you said, for some of the students and what they face. They're not going to be moving through this in a linear fashion. There's misconceptions among K-12 and post-secondary practitioners about what is available through adult ed. What do K-12 adult schools offer, and what do non-credit programs offer, and where can we find that out? Philip brought up a good point. Where is that information getting to students? And do counselors like you folks who are here at the conference know all of that information to be able to let students know what their options are? We also don't really share the same nomenclature, even across K-12 adult ed and community college adult ed, about what we call our classes. And so we don't have a shared idea even in our super region of what exactly it is we're offering. There isn't standardized data collection and reporting or what the classes are providing. And there's also, we found a lack of clarity between what the goals are in the different program areas and for the different populations. So next slide. We thought if this is a challenge for us, it certainly is difficult for students. One of the things we hope from this session is that if we share a little bit with you about the process that we went through to try to address some of these concerns, we can hear back from you, how might we get the word out to students better about what options are available for them? How do these options of K-12 adult ed and community college non-credit fit for some of the students that you might be aware of that you work with? So next slide.
Can I hop in just really quick?
Yes, please, Greg.
You sparked something that I kind of wanted to share. A couple of things. First, for those of you familiar with those two models, it's first, they're not mutually exclusive, right? They complement each other. Yet, absolutely, as Kim shared, they're, certainly the career pathways one appears far more linear than an adult student's journey, a traditional adult student's journey in and through post-secondary or just education and careers. There's a lot of back and forth that happens, a lot of reskilling and so forth. Likewise, with that guided pathways model, one of the challenges that I've seen, I'll just put this up quickly, is I've talked to different people about this. And when the topic of guided pathways comes up, I always get different answers about where adult ed fits here. I've had people say, yeah, it's, they're part of the clarifying path, all of these apply. I've had other people say, it's actually totally outside of it. There's guided pathways, which is, for high school students or whatnot, but adult school students are onesie twosie. They don't follow pathways. And what that makes me think is that just because the path, for lack of a term, is not linear or has different points in it, doesn't mean that they're not actually part of or couldn't be part of a structured pathway that supports how it is they need to move through post-secondary and educational training based on what their unique needs are. It is not, for example, simply that adult ed students are different inherently, right? It is, in general, and this is how I like to think about it, is your traditional adult ed student is largely the same. They just might be at a different point, right, in their journey. And it's just, I think a lot of you are already adult ed counselors, really familiar with adult ed. And so on some level, you already know this, but yet there are those disconnects and there are structural challenges to sort of bridging those divides. Lots of assumptions, right, about what adult ed is and isn't. And, part of this project really is designed to kind of address those things. At any rate, I just want to sort of pop in on that. You want to take it away, Kim?
Yeah. So many of you are familiar, or you may have heard about tools like Program Finder, which enables counselors and students to go into this tool and see, here are my career interests, here are the options for where I could find training for that. And right now, K-12 adult ed offerings and community college non-credit offerings are not part of that Program Finder tool. And yet, some of these offerings would be really ideal for some of the students. So we're left with this disconnect of how do we get the word out about what these programs are. And we realized that part of the problem is we are not in the same data system that the high school and the for-credit community colleges are. And in fact, we're not even using the same terminology and coding process. So we decided to look at all of our career training options and begin this alignment project. And we wanted to promote alignment across agencies in adult education and CTE programs in the greater San Diego region, and have this coordination between agencies and between consortia so we could see what is being offered for students. We wanted to be able to provide tools and resources to help the region develop this common understanding of what our courses are and what they offer, because until we do that, we can't really get that information out in a clear way to students. So we started with gathering data, developing a data warehousing system for all of this information. And again, part of our goal is to eventually get this information into Program Finder so you have easier access to it. But in the meantime, we have discovered a lot of things through this coding process that have been helpful for us. And remember back to the beginning when the consortia were founded, the idea is to not duplicate efforts and to make it really clear to students what their options are for career training and what exactly they'll get if they put their time and their money into this program. So Greg has been very involved with the region in this process, and Suzanne as well. So they're going to take you through a little information about how we started this coding process to try to categorize the career training programs that are offered in the region through K-12 and non-credit adult education. So Greg, take it away.
Thank you, Kim. So yeah, to echo, what Kim was just saying, it is often the case that the right hand in adult ed, the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. And this was something that the region really sought to try to rectify. And so we came up with a sort of project design. And actually, before I move too far into this, I wanted to acknowledge the good thinking and the work done by other folks in the region, who sort of really helped to conceptualize this even before it got funded. One of those people is Uta Machki, and there are others, and as well as some work that was done by colleagues of mine at West Ed around sort of coding existing K-12 and community college data. Ali Balela, as well as and the work of Blair Toso, who some of you may know is the lead on Launchboard Adult Ed project, and also, before I forget, Svetlana Darsh, who is in charge of the West Ed portion of the project and who helped to really drive this. Oh, that's her. Yeah, she waved. She can say hello in like 5 different languages too. Anyway, so we came with this project design. First, we wanted to identify and classify what the relevant offerings were. Adult Ed is strange in that it is adaptable, it is flexible, and responsive, which is unlike most other segments, right? But because of this, right, there's often a lack of sort of consistency, even among courses, programs that have similar names, and the grain size is often different. But anyway, I'll get into that later. But so there were like 3 pieces to this. One, parsing what's in AE by function and their connection to real world jobs. Then classifying occupational training programs or courses, which I'll define in a minute, by standard occupational codes, CalPADS, and TOPS codes. This might sound like jargon. Well, it is jargon technically, but and I'll define standard occupational codes in a moment. But those of you who come from K-12 will understand what CalPADS codes are. These are the course codes that middle school, high school CTE programs use, as well as non-CTE, to identify sector and pathway. And TOPS, taxonomy of programs, actually it's top code, is the classification system used by community colleges. And if the goal, right, is to be able to build those pathways, even as students might be moving different directions through them, but to sort of build the bridge to, from high school, K-12, through post-secondary, and sort of with adult ed either being an intermediary or running alongside, or being a supplement. We had to be able to sort of map those relationships. And then as sort of third piece, we wanted to review and refine those classifications to really confirm what to include and what not to, and related to that, really what to kind of bundle. Phase 2 is taking all that information and figuring out what to do with it. It's not uncommon for both K-12 or community college to have really robust course program mapping efforts, right? You bring together all sorts of knowledgeable people, folks, educators, teachers, administrators who really understand their program areas, sit down and map out, all of the programs, pathways leading from one point to another, and then everybody to feel good, and then it goes on a shelf and gets really dusty. And that's not something we wanted to see here. We wanted to be able to gather the information, keep it alive, make it part of how it is that programs actually assess what the needs are within within smaller regions as well as the larger region, and kind of use this process and the repository that we developed as a catalyst for continued conversations, about alignment and so forth. Because, well, anyway. All right. So I mentioned a moment ago about the parsing, and I'm not going to go too deep into this. It may or may not be germane to all of you, and so we wanted to keep it minimal. But in general, Adult Ed offers really 3 types of career-focused courses, and I'm using course really loosely. First is a sort of workforce prep. Workforce prep tends to be, general skills necessary for success. And so, that might be typing, it might be really low level, or rather really introductory Microsoft Word, or like, and by this I mean sort of like a weekend crash course, or any number of, modules, for example, that are designed to sort of help develop soft skills, more or less, that augment the more concrete training that robust CTE programs would provide. There are also what we called occupational skills builder. This can be a bit of a misnomer. And so those of you who are familiar with the idea of a skills builder, this is a different concept, although not exactly, but mostly. We're using this to describe courses or offerings that advance skills that one has already expressed through the achievement of, say, a certificate or a degree. You see this kind of thing in advanced manufacturing, in medical. Essentially, these reflect, let's say, I'm going to call them enhancements. So when someone has a credential that took them a year and they have to go back and upskill, right? It's a singular course, and you couldn't take it without having all of that context. They're supremely important, but they're kind of their own unique thing, and they don't directly lead to jobs. And then finally, and these are the ones we really want to focus on, were occupational training offerings. These reflect the kinds of courses or whatnot that have a sufficient duration and intensity to really train students for actual jobs that they're looking to enter. So there we go. I'll go to the next one. So thinking back there too, and thinking about jobs, right? Oftentimes when we even just do mapping or begin, looking at programs, we think, as in the field of education, it is very easy to think about education, right? Students aren't really quite as invested in what we call things, right? We use nomenclature, we use classification systems that matter to us. Students don't care, right? They want to get a job. And this is true of, students across the board, even those who are, pursuing, lofty intellectual pursuits. They too eventually imagine a job unless they're independently wealthy, and, good for them. But at any rate, what we wanted to do was take that into consideration and see if we might not use the job as a focal point for organizing our thoughts and the offerings across the larger region. So we look to SOC codes. SOC codes, Standard Occupational Codes, is a taxonomy developed by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. There are a bunch of different levels, and there's an example here to the right that illustrates what the relationships are. So it's like detailed occupation is the most granular, broad is the sort of container for that, minor group, and then major group, 23 major groups. What makes these different from, well, actually, you maybe ask yourself, well, what's the difference between that and like industry? The difference is industry is based on a sort of large group of, industries. So aerospace, I could say construction, things like that. And at the highest level, these major groups often do correspond to what I'm going to say, they're called NICS codes, but industry codes, or those familiar with K-12 will say sectors. Let's take, for example, management. Management is, it could be an industry, I think it is. But let's say I'm a manager for an aerospace engineering company, right? Where does my job fit? And do I need to be uniquely trained to be a manager at an aerospace technology, in aerospace technology in order to be a good manager? And the answer is no, right? I mean, like folks who are in administration, who are good managers, don't necessarily need to have that level of, they don't need that level of industry knowledge. And so thinking about that, and specifically the way that we're looking to train students to move into different potential industries and to be able to meet the needs of these specific industries within the region. We looked at the occupations. And so at any rate, that's why we made that decision. Effectively what we did is we took the coding for SOC, we also mapped to using A22 to the K-12 CalPads, and then again, top 4 and top 6, which are, again, the community college system, to see if we couldn't build those paths. We did, in so doing, we encountered some really interesting sort of findings and have kind of modified a little bit our approach. And I'll show you the data repository in a moment, to try to incorporate some of the skills builder courses as well, as we're starting to think about, again, building those pathways and figuring out where AE can fit. If we believe, and this is true, that adult learners, don't move in a linear fashion, and we understand they'll need to upskill over time. We want to make sure that some of those skills builder courses are incorporated at least into the thinking about the pathways. Likewise, in order to sort of add some value to the post-secondary students who, for example, are pursuing nursing, knowing that they can get supplemental credentials by just going to the nearby adult school for just this one little thing, would be a really important piece of information to know if you're a student trying to navigate your options. I'm going to pause just quickly to make sure that, see if folks understand what I'm saying, and if they have any questions about that process. Again, I try to, really condense it because our goal is to get to what you feel like might be valuable for what you do, not just sort of say, we did all this stuff, isn't that great? So questions, thoughts, anything I can help clarify before I'm showing you the repository and moving on. Put it in the chat, sorry.
I'm monitoring the chat, nothing yet, and we have 15 minutes remaining.
Oh, goodness, okay. I'll then sort of hop to it. Just quickly, blurred. So what we did, and I'll take literally just a minute, what we did is identified, basically established a mechanism for refining all the courses we collected, for what we call bundling them. So where there were gaps in within a number of offerings, say at a school, we try to promote taking the 1Z, 2Z classes that might be workforce prep, that might be occupational skills builder, to see if they couldn't be sort of grouped together to formulate what we eventually came up with, what we call occupational training programs, to address some of that nomenclature issue. And each school who was participated in this also, had their own worksheet. They updated it using, or rather, individuals, sometimes teams of representatives updated this, did the coding themselves. We facilitated sessions to both train and on SOC coding, on coding to SOC, among other things, and then also help to supplement, refine, et cetera, what they did. And so put it in here. And what we eventually came up with here is a repository which actually aggregates all of the data that they shared. What's novel about this, and I'm sure that it's not particularly interesting in its current expression, is that it provides the data in a structured format that creates opportunities because of this for developing additional kinds of assets. Pathway maps or inclusion into the program finder tool, if you're familiar with that. It also helped us to sort of figure out the level of detail that folks really needed sort of to have on hand and to make available to students. So oftentimes when we think about pathway mapping or looking at programs across segments, there's a sense that, oh yeah, it's always apples to apples, or we have a sense of, well, this is 16 weeks, this is 18 weeks, but it's all the same. In adult ed, not necessarily, right? Duration is very different. It's even among courses that lead to the same outcomes in some cases. Likewise, hours of instruction may vary widely, and these are things that are super important to a student. How much time do I have to commit to this program before I can get a job, right? And then also highlighting where those distinctions are so that among different providers of alike programs, there can be conversations about, wait a minute, if mine takes 108 hours of instruction and yours take 52, can we say these are comparable? And maybe, right? But there's no way that the conversation wouldn't happen unless we actually sort of were able to bring folks together and focus their energies around actually laying bare what they have and what they know. So I'm trying to be mindful of time. So let me pop back here. So coding process is really valuable. You yielded valuable data. You can all have access to the slide deck, so you can read this. But suffice it to say, this is the big one. I think these two yielded a lot of valuable data that can be used across the region for program design improvement. And also, it was super valuable and important and insightful to triangulate across these three data sets. And I don't know, honestly. Let me think about this. SOC top, yeah. I can't think of an example where this has been done anywhere else in the state with adult ed. For K-12, you have it for community college. There's some crosswalking there. And I'll even add this, when we, one of the things that we found is there is actually remarkable consistency in how different programs are coded, and which really is interesting and I think suggests, like there are real conditions of possibility for developing pathways from high school through adult ed into post-secondary and often back. Anyway, okay, discussion. Whew. Kim, do you want to take this?
So yes, so we have done all this coding work, and so now we know that there are short-term career training options for quick upskilling, for adding credentials. We know that you can do welding at Palomar, you can do QuickBooks and accounting at Poway Adult School. There's a vocational nursing program at HOC. Many of these programs also provide embedded support if you need to finish a high school diploma while you're doing those classes, or additional support if you need language proficiency activities or help as you're finishing these certification programs. So we know all this now because we've done the coding. But our question for those of you who are here that work with students, what would you need to know to be able to share these ideas with students for whom it might be a good fit? We're not in Program Finder yet. Would that be a resource if we could put these into Program Finder? That would be a helpful tool for you. Or what else would you need to know to be able to match students to these sorts of opportunities that might be a good fit for them? Philip mentioned, yeah, just sending it out in the mail isn't enough and it's gotten really expensive. So how could we get this information that now we know to counselors like you and people who work with advising students. So that's our question that we'd love to hear from the group. I know there's quite a few of us here who already know about the project and have been working on it, but there's a handful of you here who are working with students. So if you have thoughts about what would you like to have to be able to better inform the students you work with about these opportunities that might be just a good fit or a good complement to what else they're doing with their post-secondary work.
So Philip mentioned that transportability is an issue, that they have students between Palomar and Miracosta and Vista Adult Education that get stuck in the middle. When they start somewhere and move, many times their work to date is lost.
That's fascinating, actually. Yes. Thank you. Having that sort of being able
Great
to
point.
know, it sounds like, right? Like if you go here, this is also here, even within adult schools. Yeah.
So Philip, can I ask if that is partly if a student is in the middle of a program and switches from one to the other, or even if a program is completed, some of that completed work isn't transferring?
In the middle. So they're in the middle of a program and they want to move and continue, and they don't have the ability because that program isn't offered at the partner, correct? He said they have a lot of transient families.
That's a great point.
And that's so useful in thinking about that program planning, where it's okay if there is a high need for one program, but it's only in one place, right? Knowing how the populations might move within the larger region, or where within a region, you know, where there's more diffusion of the population versus centralization. Yeah, that's so astute. This is so valuable to hear. Yeah.
And Philip, you mentioned Trade Tech High School. So are you saying that people are starting at Trade Tech and then moving and there's nowhere to continue? Is that? Just wanting clarification on that one. Oh, that's where you work. Okay, so you have people that have started a program and then are moving and there's nowhere to pick it up. Is that the issue? Yes. See, and that's a good opportunity to, work with the other institutions within the area to make sure that we have the ability, the alignment and the ability to continue at another location. But Uta is mentioning that she thinks the repository will allow for the alignment work that Philip mentions. And I agree. And yes, Philip, it would be discouraging for students. They've started and it's like, I want to continue. I want to finish. How can I do that? So agreeing that having the information available, and that's where can we make that information available to the students so they can see, okay, I started here and now I want to continue. What's available in the area? We do have the program finder for the high school to the community college piece, but how can we let the students know what's available in adult ed that might serve that purpose or help them continue on their path? You're just saying that ideally the providers will revise our programming based on these student experiences. And that is why we want to hear from you on what's missing. What are you seeing from the students? So thank you, Philip, for sharing that. If there's anyone else that has some thoughts on this, on how we can improve, how we can make those connections for students, that would be great if you could pop that in the chat or unmute if you would prefer.
Yes, feel free to unmute.
We've only got about 4 more minutes left.
If there are also ideas that from your area of expertise and the students that you work with, thoughts that you have about where are gaps Where do you find that you're saying, I wish there was a program like this that students are asking for? I wish there were something like this to meet this type of a need. We'd love to hear those thoughts as well.
As you're thinking about that, I just want to remind you all that once the session is over, to please rate your session. And again, thank you all for attending today. Really appreciate it, and appreciate the work on presenting, Kim and Greg. Thank you so much for that. And if you're willing, if you're willing to turn on your camera so I can just kind of take a snapshot of who's in the room for this session, that would be great as well. But up to you. Nothing else in the chat yet.
You're doing the snapshot now?
I was working on it, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, I'll do it again. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
And of course, just last slide, feel free to reach out. You know, Kim, as you've all heard, is extraordinarily knowledgeable and one of the leads of the work group here. And I am happy to issue questions to her if you email me. But thank you all.
See anything yet in the, oh, I've got to thank you. No other questions in the chat.
So again, as we're wrapping up and Suzanne's getting ready to take a picture, our goal really is to do a better job of serving all students and provide equitable access to training that people need. And we don't want to waste people's time or people's money. Philip, thank you for bringing up some of the challenges that students are facing. I think that's a really great example of when our processes waste students' time and money, because we haven't figured out how to make our pathways truly clear and in a way that makes sense for students to be able to get what they need, take it with them to the next place. And that really is our goal. So any ideas you have about helping us towards that goal, again, feel free to reach out to us. That's the goal that we're working on with this project and we'll be continuing with. So thanks very much for joining us today, listening a little bit to our work that we're doing with this coding project, and hopefully you'll be hearing more from us and more about programs that are available for students through K-12 adult education and community college non-credit.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We have another great keynote speaker and then 2 more sessions for you. Thanks a lot.